It started with a dream, his dream. Jason had always talked about opening a restaurant. Ever since he was a boy playing with plastic kitchen sets while other kids built forts, he dreamed in flavors and ingredients. He would tell me, "One day I'll open a place where every dish tastes like a warm memory." As a mother, how could I not believe in that? So when he came to me at 31, eyes bright and voice trembling with excitement, saying he had found the perfect spot in the heart of the city, I didn't hesitate. "I need capital, Mom," he said, placing a carefully written plan in front of me. "I've got the lease lined up, the kitchen supplier ready. I just need the cash to get things going." I was 64, retired, and living on a modest pension. I had worked as an accountant my entire adult life. I wasn't rich, but I'd been careful. I had 183,000 dollars saved, my safety net, my cushion for old age. Jason asked for $160,000. That number should have scared me. It should have made me pause, maybe call my lawyer, or at least ask more questions. But I didn't. Because in that moment I wasn't an accountant. I was just a mother who had watched her son struggle through failed jobs, a broken engagement, and years of doubting his worth. I wanted to give him the one thing life hadn't given him yet, a real chance. "You've always believed in me," he whispered when I handed him the check. "This is going to change everything." And maybe it did, just not in the way I expected. The first month after I gave him the money was filled with excitement. Jason would call me almost daily. "Mom, I met with the designer today," he'd say. "You should see the mock-ups, earth tones, modern wood finishes. It'll feel like home." He even brought me to the building once, though it was still just bare floors and dust-covered walls. He described every corner with such passion that I could already smell the roasted garlic and hear the buzz of happy diners. I remember clutching my purse tighter, staring at that half-finished space, and feeling a strange blend of fear and awe. Was this the moment everything changed? But then, he started calling less. Texts slowed. I told myself he was just busy. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who hovered. I'd already sacrificed my retirement. I didn't want to guilt-trip him too. Besides, I trusted him. That was the real truth. I trusted him more than I trusted my own instincts. One afternoon, I decided to visit the location on my own. I wanted to surprise him, maybe bring lunch, see the progress. But when I got there, it was locked. No work vans, no construction noise, no lights, just a dim, dusty shell behind a rusting gate. I stood there for 10 minutes, blinking like I was seeing something I shouldn't have. I dialed Jason's number, straight to voicemail. Then again, and again. I told myself it was fine. Maybe he was at a supplier. Maybe it was a temporary delay. Renovations are unpredictable. Still, that night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed with my old work laptop open, staring at the banking app where I'd wired the money. All those zeros gone in a blink. The next morning, I called him again. And again, the morning after that. Days passed. Until finally, a week later, he picked up. "Hey, Mom," he said breezily, like nothing was wrong. "What's up?" "What's up?" I repeated, forcing calm. "I went to the restaurant. It was locked." "Are you okay?" A pause. Yeah, just some scheduling issues with the contractor. Nothing big. I'll update you later, okay?" Before I could reply, he hung up. Something inside me shrank. The next day, I walked to my neighbor Lydia's place. She's a retired nurse and one of the few friends I've kept in my life. I didn't say much, just mentioned Jason's project. I think I was fishing for reassurance. Instead, she gave me a sad look and asked, "You didn't put that money in writing, did you?" That question made me feel like a fool. No, of course I hadn't. There were no contracts, no repayment plans, no signatures, just a check and a mother's trust. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the envelope where I kept all my important documents: the insurance, the will, the pension details. I opened it and added a sticky note. "Call lawyer, Monday." But before I could even lift the phone the next morning, Jason texted me. "Going dark for a few days. Traveling to meet with new investors. We'll call soon. Love you." It was like watching the end of a rope slide out of your hands. You know you should have tied a knot. You know you should have held on tighter, but you didn't. You trusted. I looked at that message for a long time, and for the first time since I gave him that money, I felt something I didn't want to feel: dread. The next 3 weeks passed like a bad dream I couldn't wake from. Every morning I would check my phone before even getting out of bed. Nothing. No messages, no missed calls, no "I'm okay, Mom." Nothing but silence. It's amazing how quickly silence turns from peace into punishment. I told myself I wasn't going to spiral, that I'd raised Jason better than this, that he must be caught up in something important. Something good. Maybe he was negotiating a big deal and didn't want to jinx it. But lies told to comfort are still lies, and I was running out of ways to protect myself from the truth. Eventually, I went back to the restaurant location, not even sure what I hoped to find: a sign of progress, a permit notice, a smiling worker who'd tell me, "He's inside, ma'am. Your son's doing great." Instead, I found an eviction notice taped to the door. Eviction. Dated 2 weeks ago. Filed for non-payment of rent. A full 2 months after I'd wired Jason $160,000. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. I stood there on the sidewalk surrounded by city noise, clutching the cold metal gate of a dream that had already died. That was the moment I stopped hoping. The mother in me didn't die, but she finally sat down and shut up. I went home, made a cup of tea with shaking hands, and forced myself to read through my bank statements line by line. The transfer to Jason was there: large, final, irreversible. Next to it was another transaction I hadn't noticed before. 2 days later, he had wired $18,000 to a different account under a woman's name I didn't recognize. I Googled her. Her name was Tasha Lynn, 28 years old, fitness influencer, and Jason's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Her Instagram was full of beaches, smoothies, and self-love quotes. And right there on a post from last week was Jason smiling, shirtless, sunburned, holding her hand on a boat. "Taking risks together is the only way to live," the caption read. My hands began to tremble. I closed the laptop before I could throw it. I didn't cry. Not that night. I didn't even scream. I just sat in silence and watched the shadows move across my living room walls. They looked like memories I didn't want anymore. I stopped calling him after that. I blocked his number, deleted his name from my favorites. But the thing about being a mother is you can block a number, but you can't block a heartbeat. A week later, I got a call from my sister Elena. "Margaret," she said gently, "I saw something you might want to know." I sighed. "If it's about Jason, it is. He's featured in a local blog. They're doing a spotlight on new restaurant owners in the area. There's a piece on Tasha, actually. It's titled, 'Young Power Couple Bring Farm-to-Table Vibes to Downtown.'" I didn't want to look. I had no desire to see it. But I did. The article gushed about how Tasha had poured her own savings into opening a quaint cafe called Root and Bloom, praising the creative menu and bohemian design. Jason was described as the silent partner with culinary vision. I stared at the photo. There was Jason behind the counter, smiling like he had never disappointed anyone in his life. There was no mention of me. No thank you. No hint that the cafe existed because his mother had handed him her entire future in a single check. I felt my throat tighten, not from sadness but shame. I had been erased. That weekend, I went to visit Elena. I hadn't seen her in months. She hugged me tighter than usual when I walked in. "You look thinner," she said. I nodded. "Stress diet." She poured us wine and we sat on her porch like we used to as teenagers, just two women watching the sky fade into dark. "I could help you financially?" she said after a long silence. "You know that, right?" I shook my head. "Not yet," I whispered. "I need to understand what happened first. I need to get clear." Elena didn't argue. She knew me well enough to know I wouldn't ask unless I was at the very edge. I spent the next week documenting everything: receipts, messages, bank statements. I printed them out and put them in a manila folder labeled Truth in capital letters. I also wrote down every memory I had of Jason's pitch, the conversations, the promises, even the exact way his voice had cracked when he said, "This is my one-shot mom." Each detail was a needle, but I needed to bleed it out. I reached out to an old friend from work, Russell. He had been a corporate lawyer before retiring early. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but when I explained the situation, his tone shifted from friendly to serious in seconds. "You gave him the money without a written contract?" "Yes." "Any email chain confirming the purpose?" I think I have one text. I'll send it." I forwarded him a message Jason had sent that said, "Thank you, Mom. This restaurant is going to be everything we dreamed about." Russell called me the next day. "Technically, we might have a case for financial deception," he said. "But you need to ask yourself, what do you want out of this?" I was quiet for a long time. "I want the truth to come out," I said finally. "I don't care about the money. I want him to know I'm not the fool he thinks I am." Russell sighed. "Then prepare yourself. Because going after your own child, it won't bring peace. It might only confirm the heartbreak." I knew he was right. But there's something worse than heartbreak. It's the realization that your silence made you a participant. A few days later, Jason came to my door. He hadn't called first. Just rang the bell like everything was fine. When I opened the door, he looked surprised, like he didn't expect me to answer. "Mom," he said, smiling nervously. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check in." I stared at him. His hair was longer. He smelled like expensive cologne. His shoes were new. And he was holding a bouquet of daisies, my least favorite flower. "I can't stay," I said, stepping back. "But what do you need?" He hesitated. I'm trying to expand the cafe. We want to add outdoor seating, get live music. The city requires more permits. It's expensive." My blood ran cold. He kept talking, pitching me like I was a stranger with a checkbook. "We just need a little more capital. I'd pay you back in installments." "We're close, Mom. So close." I let him finish. Then I said, "Jason, I'm not feeling well. I think you should go." He blinked, taken aback. "Are you angry with me?" "I'm tired," I said simply. "That's all." He stared at me for a second longer. Then, without another word, he turned and left. I stood there in the doorway long after he was gone, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like his mother. I felt like a mark. And I knew if I didn't act now, I'd carry this betrayal to my grave. The next morning, I woke up to a silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt final. I sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight cutting harsh lines across the wood, and opened the folder I had labeled Truth. I placed it beside a cup of coffee I barely touched. I had given him everything, and he had come back for more. I stared at the folder like it could somehow speak for me, take all the guilt out of my hands. But of course it couldn't. It wasn't justice. It wasn't closure. It was just paper. I took a deep breath and called Russell. "I want to do it," I said. "Whatever it takes. I want to file." There was silence on the other end, and then he replied softly, "Okay, Margaret. I'll walk you through it step by step. Filing a legal claim against your own child is not like calling the police on a stranger or confronting a thief on the street. It's grief in slow motion. The process was humiliating in ways I hadn't expected. I had to recount every dollar, every message, every conversation. I had to say things out loud like, "Yes, I gave the money voluntarily. No, we didn't write it down. Yes, he is my biological son." I had to admit on record that I had trusted him more than myself, that I had believed his voice over my instincts, that I had allowed love to cloud reason. Russell explained that we would be filing for civil damages under financial misrepresentation and potentially coercive misuse of funds, a murky but possible route, given the emotional manipulation involved. It wouldn't be easy. The odds weren't strong, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't doing this to win back the money. I was doing it to win back me. Weeks passed. The paperwork was filed. Jason hadn't responded yet. I didn't reach out. I didn't warn him. If he was surprised by the letter, I wouldn't know. But I imagine he was. Then one evening, I received a message not from him, but from Tasha. "Hi, Margaret. I just received something at the cafe. A legal letter. I don't really understand what it's about. But Jason is really upset. Maybe we could talk." There was no greeting, no apology, just her sleek, performative worry. I didn't reply. The next day, Jason called from a new number. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? You're blowing things out of proportion. You're going to ruin everything. Don't do this. Let's just talk, okay?" Still, I said nothing. Let him sit with that silence. Let him feel what I had felt for months. But silence doesn't mean peace. One night, I sat in my living room, unable to sleep. The air felt thick, like it was pressing against my skin. I got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out an old photo album. Jason, at 4 years old, covered in flour, grinning up at me from behind a mess of cookie dough. Jason, at 12, arms slung around me, beaming at his middle school graduation. Jason, at 21, eyes heavy, hugging me after his father's funeral. How do you go from those moments to a courtroom? I pressed my hand to the photo, feeling as if touching it might somehow take me back. But the past, I realized, isn't soft. It hardens over time like cooled wax. It doesn't bend, it just breaks. And I was done breaking. The court date was set. Jason didn't appear. His lawyer filed a brief citing that familial conflict should not be escalated through legal means, and that the funds were a gift freely given. My own lawyer stood up in that quiet courtroom and spoke words I never imagined needing. "We are not challenging that the funds were given. We are arguing that the money was obtained under false pretenses, that the intent from the beginning was not to use them for the stated business venture." He presented the documentation, the text messages, the social media posts, the financial trail. He showed the court how the restaurant under Jason's name never existed, how funds were transferred within days to another account, how a business was registered under Tasha's name weeks before Jason asked me for the money. It was clinical, cold, almost surgical. I didn't cry. Not then. But I watched the judge's face carefully. She looked tired, not surprised. Like she had seen too many of these stories, too many betrayals dressed up as misunderstandings. Jason never showed. Not once. At the end of the day, the judge said she would deliberate and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. We left the courtroom in silence. Russell walked me to my car. "Whatever happens," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "you showed up for yourself. That matters." It did. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew now that I wasn't powerless. That night, I stood in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror. My face was tired but not broken. I saw the lines etched deep around my eyes, the gray streaks in my hair. I didn't see a fool. I saw a woman who had survived. A mother who had finally drawn the line. A woman who would not go quietly into invisibility. I turned off the light. I went to bed. And for the first time in months, I slept. 2 weeks came and went. Every day felt like a year. Every quiet moment was filled with questions I didn't want to answer. What if the judge sided with him? What if all of this was for nothing? What if in the end I had simply destroyed the last fragile tie between us? Then on a cloudy Tuesday morning, a plain envelope arrived. No dramatic stamp, no knock on the door. Just an envelope tucked neatly in the mailbox between ads and bills. Inside was the ruling. I read the first paragraph 3 times before the meaning settled in. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Margaret Holloway, on the grounds of deceptive use of familial funds under false pretenses. A partial restitution is ordered in the amount of $82,000, not the full amount, but acknowledgement, recognition, proof that I hadn't imagined it, that my pain had shape form and now, legal weight. I sat down on the porch, the envelope in my lap, and let the wind pass over me. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. It wasn't victory, but it was validation. And sometimes that's enough to keep breathing. Later that evening, my sister Elena came by with a bottle of wine. We sat under the string lights in my small backyard, two folding chairs between patches of overgrown grass. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real, more real than the polished, manicured world Jason had chosen to escape into. So she said, pouring us each a glass. "What now?" I shrugged. "I don't know." "You won," she said. "I didn't want to win," I said quietly. "I just wanted to matter." She didn't argue. She just placed a hand on mine and gave it a gentle squeeze. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since someone touched me with kindness. 2 days later, a courier delivered a check. It was signed by Jason. No note, no apology, just the amount the court had ordered. I held it in my hands and felt empty. It wasn't the money that had hurt me. It was how easily he had cast me aside, how quickly he'd turned love into leverage. I didn't want to cash it. I didn't want his money. But I also didn't want to be foolish enough to let pride hurt me twice. So I deposited the check, and then did something unexpected. I donated half of it to a local community kitchen. Not in my name, just quietly, anonymously. The rest I kept for the repairs my house so badly needed. The leaky roof, the broken tile in the bathroom, the garage door that groaned like an old man every time it opened. The things I had put off because I believed I was building something with my son. That weekend, I took the bus downtown and walked past Root and Bloom, the restaurant Jason and Tasha had built with my money. The patio was busy young couples sipping matcha friends, laughing over grain bowls and artfully arranged toast. It looked successful. But when I peered through the window, I didn't see Jason. Instead, I saw Tasha standing confidently behind the counter directing staff posing for a picture with what looked like a local food blogger. He was nowhere in sight. Curious, I walked into the flower shop next door pretending to browse. "Do you know if the guy still runs that cafe?" I asked casually. The shop owner raised her brows. "Him. Oh, he hasn't been around for months. Heard they broke up. Something about money problems. Typical, right?" I smiled politely, thanked her, and left. Outside, I stood on the corner staring at that bustling cafe, the place that had once represented my ruin. Now it just looked like another business built on borrowed charm. And for the first time, I felt free of it. A week later, a letter arrived. From Jason. Handwritten. The envelope smudged, the handwriting barely legible. I debated throwing it away, but I didn't. Inside was a short note. "Mom, I heard you won. I'm not surprised. I don't know what to say. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just didn't want to fail again. I know I hurt you. I know I lost you. Maybe for good. I'm sorry. Jason." There was no ask for forgiveness, no request for a second chance, just words. And somehow, that was harder to take than silence, because it made it real, because it came too late. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "Things I will no longer apologize for. Believing in my son. Giving without a contract. Wanting to matter. Loving too much. Protecting myself now." I didn't write him back. Not because I hate him, but because some wounds need silence more than closure. I now spend my mornings volunteering at that same community kitchen I donated to. I chop vegetables, wash dishes, hand out plates to people who say thank you with weary eyes and grateful hands, and not one of them has ever taken from me what I wasn't ready to give. Sometimes the head chef, a young woman named Carla, lets me try my hand at the stove. "You've got a good feel for this," she said once, smiling. You ever think about working in food? I just smiled. I once knew someone who did. Some people think that starting over means wiping the slate clean, but I've learned that real healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. I wake up every morning now before the sun rises. I make tea real loose leaf, not the bags, and sit on the small porch outside my kitchen. I watch the neighborhood slowly come alive. I listen to the birds. I let the quiet fill me. And every morning I ask myself one question. What do I get to reclaim today? Not money, not youth, not even justice, but dignity, peace. A version of myself that doesn't flinch every time the phone rings. Because for too long I let motherhood blur the lines of identity. I let sacrifice become expectation. I let love become my leash. And that leash was handed to Jason freely. He didn't steal it. I offered it with trembling hands and whispered, "Use it wisely." He didn't. A few days after I received his letter, I was at the market when I saw someone I hadn't seen in years, Lena Winters, Jason's high school friend. She was in her 30s now, wearing scrubs, probably on break from a nursing shift. She looked tired but kind. "Mrs. Holloway?" she said, approaching me with a bag of oranges. I turned wary but nodded. "Lena." She smiled. "It's been a while, it has." We chatted briefly, small talk really. She asked about Jason. I gave her a polite answer. "He's doing what he does." She tilted her head. "He was always a dreamer," she said. "But you always believed in him." I remember thinking how lucky he was to have that. Lucky. The word sat on my chest like a weight. Was he lucky? Or did I make it too easy for him to believe he was owed something just for being born? I said goodbye and walked home with my groceries. But that word wouldn't leave me alone. Lucky. That night, I pulled out an old journal I hadn't touched in years. The pages were yellowed, the ink fading, but my handwriting was still unmistakable, neat, deliberate, a little tight. Just like me. I flipped through entries filled with hope. Jason's college years, his first heartbreak, the years after his father passed. My handwriting got more strained after that. Shorter entries, more ellipses, more weight between the lines. And then I found one from 5 years ago. "Jason called today to say he wants to leave his job. He says his boss doesn't get him. I told him to give it time to learn something from the struggle. He didn't listen. He never does. But I keep telling myself he will. Eventually." Even back then I knew. Some part of me always knew. But I kept covering that knowing with layers of belief. Not in Jason necessarily, but in the idea of him. The son I thought I was still shaping. The boy I believed could still be guided. The truth is, he stopped listening long ago. I was just too afraid to stop speaking. A week later, Elena and I went to a community lecture at the local library. It was about elder fraud and financial abuse, topics that used to feel distant. Now they felt like someone reading pages of my own diary aloud. The speaker, a retired judge, talked about how the most common form of financial abuse in older adults doesn't come from strangers. It comes from family, from sons, from daughters, from those they raised. She said something that stayed with me. "There's a moment every parent faces when they must decide, do I protect the child I love or the adult who hurt me?" After the event, as we walked to the car, Elena asked if I regretted filing the case. I took a breath. "I don't regret the fight," I said. "I regret waiting so long to recognize I needed to fight." She nodded. "You were too busy loving." "No," I said. "I was too busy hoping." I never did reply to Jason's letter. I wrote responses in my head a dozen times, letters full of wisdom, anger, forgiveness, or warnings. But none of them ever made it to the page, because in the end, nothing I say will change him. And I've finally stopped trying to parent a grown man who refuses to grow. What I did instead was more quiet. I took the last remaining pieces of his childhood, the photos, the drawings, the report cards, and packed them into a box. I tied it shut with twine. Then I carried it to the attic, placed it gently in a corner, and walked away. Not as an act of hatred, but as an act of release. A few nights ago, I stood at the sink doing dishes after volunteering. My hands were wet, the radio was playing something old and soft, and I was humming without realizing it. And then, out of nowhere, I felt it. Pride. Not for Jason, not for the past, but for me. For surviving heartbreak. For choosing dignity over silence. For finally putting myself first. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Just a quiet, steady warmth in my chest, like forgiveness, but not toward him. Toward myself. There was a time when I imagined Jason growing older and becoming the kind of man who would come home for Sunday dinners. I pictured him at the head of the table, his laugh filling the room, his arm around a kind woman who loved him the way I always hoped someone would. Maybe a child or two running through the kitchen barefoot. In that dream, he would say, "Mom, none of this would have happened without you." And I'd smile, thinking the struggle was worth it. But that fantasy was just another story I told myself to make reality easier to swallow. Because the truth is, Jason wasn't the boy in that dream anymore. And maybe he never was. I hadn't seen him in person since that strange visit, the one where he asked for more money while holding a bouquet of daisies like they could erase everything he'd done. But one Thursday afternoon, as I walked out of the market carrying a bag of produce, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom." I turned, and there he was. He looked different, thinner, a little drawn, the glow of new ambition gone from his face. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and no expensive watch. His hair was longer and unkempt. His hands were in his pockets. He looked like someone who had finally run out of distractions. "I didn't think you'd stop," he said. "I almost didn't." He swallowed. "I got your silence loud and clear." I nodded. "Good." We stood on the sidewalk like strangers who used to know each other, the distance between us full of things we'd never say. "I'm sorry," he murmured. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because it didn't matter anymore. Things fell apart after the case, he continued. Tasha left. The cafe's barely staying afloat. Investors pulled out. I guess I burned everything down. There was no bitterness in his voice, just exhaustion. "I'm working at a friend's restaurant now," he added. "Dishwashing mostly. Starting over." I looked at him, unsure of what to feel. He looked older, not just in the face but in the spirit. There was a time I would have rushed in to fix things to lift him again. But that version of me was gone. "I hope you're learning something," I said. He winced. "Every day," he replied. Then quietly, "I miss you." I looked away. The wind picked up, brushing past us like a third presence watching, listening. "I don't miss who you became," I said softly. "But I miss the part of you that still knew how to care." He said nothing. After a moment, I stepped forward and reached into my bag. I pulled out an apple, fresh, red, heavy, and handed it to him. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a gesture, a reminder. "You were once a boy who looked to me for nourishment, for love, for guidance. And this is all I have left to give." He took it, eyes glassy, and nodded. "Take care of yourself, Jason." Then I turned and walked away. And he didn't follow. That night, I journaled again. Not about Jason, but about the kitchen. About Carla teaching me how to make tomato bisque from scratch. About how it made the entire room smell like comfort. About the woman who came in for a meal and stayed to help us clean up, whispering, "This was the first real meal I've had in a week." Those were the people who mattered now. People who gave what they could. People who didn't take more than was offered. People who said thank you and meant it. I no longer spent my days waiting for someone to say, "You were right." I no longer needed to be right. I just needed to be whole. A few days later, I received an unexpected package. It was from Jason. Inside was a small frame. It held a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Jason, age 5, in our old kitchen. He was wearing an apron covered in flour, holding a wooden spoon like a trophy. On the back, in handwriting that trembled just a little, "Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't deserve it." There was nothing else. No apology. No promises. Just that. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I placed it on the shelf near my stove next to the jars of dried herbs and olive oil. Not in the center. Not in a place of honor. But present. Because memory is complicated. And love, even when broken, still leaves behind pieces that shimmer in the right light. The photo stayed on that shelf for weeks. Sometimes I'd glance at it while stirring soup or wiping down the counter after my volunteer shift. I wouldn't stop to hold it or dwell on it, but I'd notice it. It became a quiet artifact of a life I once lived. Not a shrine, not a scar, just a reminder. And in time, it stopped stinging. That's how healing works, I think. It doesn't arrive like a miracle. It settles slowly, quietly, until one day you realize the weight you were carrying has become something you can lift without flinching. Carla, the head chef at the community kitchen, noticed a change in me. "You've got a little more light in you lately," she said as we peeled onions one afternoon. "What's the secret?" I smiled. "Letting go of things that never said thank you." She laughed. "Ain't that the truth?" Carla had been through her own share of heartbreak. She once told me that she'd started the kitchen after her sister died, built it out of grief, turned sorrow into service. We shared something in that unspoken space between us. Not every story needs to be told in full to be understood. And maybe that's why I felt safe there. It wasn't just about giving food. It was about giving pieces of yourself without expecting anything in return. The opposite of everything Jason had become. One Sunday, as we closed up for the evening, a teenage boy came in late. He looked nervous. His hoodie was too big. His sneakers untied, his eyes darting around the room like he expected to be yelled at. "We're almost out," I said gently, "but I've got some stew left. Want a bowl?" He nodded quickly. I served him the last of it and watched as he sat in the corner, spooning it quietly into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days. When he finished, he walked up to me and mumbled, "Thanks." Then, after a pause, "You made this." "I helped," I said. "Why?" He shrugged. "Tastes like something my grandma used to make." And just like that, my heart cracked open, warm and painful all at once. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Maybe I wasn't meant to be the kind of mother who's remembered for her perfect son. Maybe I'm meant to be the kind of woman who remembers how to mother the world instead." One morning, not long after, I received another letter. This time, it was from a law firm. Jason was filing for personal bankruptcy. I stared at the paper, reading every word, tracing the cold formality of the language. It listed his debts, his failed partnerships, the liquidation of Root and Bloom. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. I was no longer a part of his narrative. Strangely, I felt relief. Because for the first time, he was finally facing the consequences without dragging me with him. I didn't reach out. I didn't send money. I didn't even speak to Elena about it. Instead, I folded the letter, placed it in the same folder that once held every piece of our financial nightmare, and tucked it away in the back of a drawer. Then I went to the kitchen and baked banana bread for the volunteers. Life goes on. That weekend, the kitchen hosted a thank you dinner for the staff and regular helpers. It was a simple affair, folding tables dressed with paper cloth, plastic cups of lemonade, candles flickering in glass jars. Carla stood up and gave a short speech about everyone's efforts and kindness. When she mentioned my name, people clapped. I felt something stir inside me, not pride exactly, but warmth, like I'd been seen. Afterward, a woman I barely knew came up to me. "I always see you here," she said. "You remind me of my mom. The way you carry yourself. Quiet but strong." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "She passed last year," the woman added. But when I watch you serve food, I feel a little less alone. There it was again. A thank you I didn't expect. One that wasn't tied to blood, or debt, or obligation. Just human to human. On my way home that night, I passed a street musician playing something slow and mournful on a cello. I stopped, letting the notes settle deep in my chest. There was no grand conclusion to my story. No big finale. No perfect ending. Just music in the dark. Just a woman walking home with the sound of her own steps finally feeling steady again. They say wounds fade, but scars remain. I used to think that was a metaphor for heartbreak. Now I know it's also about identity, the way trauma reshapes how you walk through the world. Quietly, carefully, as if everything you once trusted might bite again. The day after the thank you dinner at the community kitchen, I sat alone on my porch with a mug of chamomile tea. The steam rose into the crisp autumn air. The street was still. Leaves danced quietly on the sidewalk. My hands wrapped around the warmth like it was a shield from all that had gone cold inside me. I was alone, but not lonely. I hadn't heard from Jason in weeks, and part of me was grateful. The silence no longer screamed. It hummed. And in that quiet, I had found something I hadn't felt in years myself. That morning, I decided to clean out my old garage. Not out of necessity, just curiosity. Years of clutter had turned it into a dusty tomb of forgotten things. Paint cans, broken chairs, boxes of old tax files and mismatched light bulbs. But also, fragments of a life I'd left behind. Halfway through, I found a large plastic tub labeled Jason. Elementary school. The handwriting was mine. Firm, purposeful. The kind of penmanship you use when you still believe everything will be preserved. I sat down on an old milk crate and opened the lid. Inside were drawings, spelling tests, birthday cards, a macaroni necklace in a Ziploc bag. And at the very bottom, folded with the reverence of a sacred text, was a letter he had written me in 2nd grade. Dear Mom, you make the best pancakes in the world. When I grow up, I'm going to open a restaurant and call it Mom's Kitchen. I love you more than anything. Your son, Jason. I ran my fingers across the paper. The misspellings, the backward S, the sincerity. That little boy, that wide-eyed child who dreamed of honoring his mother, where had he gone? Had I loved him too much, or not enough in the right way? Had my belief in him turned into permission to betray me? I folded the letter slowly and placed it in my apron pocket. Not to throw away, but to keep. Not for hope, not for guilt, but for truth. Sometimes the most painful part of love is not losing someone. It's realizing they were never quite who you thought they were to begin with. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen chopping carrots for stew when the doorbell rang. I dried my hands and walked to the front door, already feeling my chest tighten. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he was. Jason. No warning, no message, just standing there like he had every right in the world to be on my doorstep. Hi, Mom, he said softly. I didn't speak, just stared. He looked worse than the last time I saw him. Thinner, pale. There were dark circles under his eyes. His once proud posture had shrunk into something almost adolescent, slouched shoulders, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of a tattered coat. I know I shouldn't have come without asking, he continued, but I didn't know how else to. He trailed off. I stepped aside, not out of warmth, but because the porch was cold and I didn't want the neighbors listening. He entered silently, glancing around as if the walls might accuse him. They probably should have. I walked back to the kitchen and resumed chopping. It gave me something to do. Something to focus on besides the ache building in my spine. He sat at the small table eyes on the cutting board. I got the bankruptcy approved, he said finally. I have to start over completely. No credit, no capital, nothing. I didn't respond. I'm staying with a friend. On his couch. He's got 2 kids. It's tight. Still, I said nothing. I've been applying to kitchens. Line cook, dishwasher prep, anything. Good, I said. One word. Sharp. Clean. He flinched like it had cut him. I don't know why I came. To be pitied, I asked. Forgiven. He shook his head. I don't deserve either. I stopped chopping. Looked up. No, I said. You don't. He blinked, swallowing hard. But I added, you're still my son, and I won't let the worst of you erase the best of me. He looked confused. You broke something, I said. But I won't keep bleeding to prove I loved you. I know I hurt you. You used me, Jason. I didn't mean you didn't mean to steal from me, or you didn't mean to disappear when it mattered most. He lowered his gaze. I wasn't just your bank, Jason. I was your mother. I know. No, I don't think you do. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his coat. I came, he said, because I wanted you to know I think about what I did. Every day. And I know you may never let me back into your life, but if there's ever a time, when you need help, or when you want to see me again, I'll come running. The kitchen was quiet. Only the sound of the knife tapping against the cutting board remained. He stood slowly. I'll go. And he did. That night, I cried for the first time in months, not because I missed him, but because I felt everything I'd been pushing down finally rise to the surface: guilt, rage, grief, and a strange, hollow kind of relief. I wasn't numb anymore. I was awake. And that's when I knew healing doesn't mean you never feel pain again. It means the pain no longer decides what you do next. In the weeks that followed, I made a decision. I contacted a nonprofit organization that supports elderly victims of financial abuse. I told them I wanted to share my story not for sympathy, but for education. They invited me to speak at an upcoming seminar. I agreed. It terrified me. But I knew I had to. So I stood in a room full of strangers, other women mostly, and I told them everything. Not with tears, not with rage, but with the steady voice of someone who had walked through fire and still carried her shape. I saw heads nod, eyes glisten. Afterward, a woman approached me and whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." I thought I was the only one. That made it all worth it. Because the hardest stories to tell are often the ones someone else desperately needs to hear. One morning, Carla at the kitchen said she wanted to take a few weeks off and asked if I could supervise the lunch prep while she was away. I hesitated at first, but then she said, "Margaret, the volunteers respect you. They follow you already. You just haven't noticed." So I said yes. And the first day, I stood in that kitchen directing the team, adjusting recipes, encouraging the shy ones, calming the stressed ones. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Capable. Not as someone's mother, not as a broken woman reclaiming her dignity, but simply as a woman who had more to give. And this time, she'd give it wisely. One night, I got another letter from Jason. Short. Honest. "Mom, I'm still working. Still trying. I haven't touched alcohol in 40 days. I've paid off part of my friend's rent. I'm trying to become someone I don't hate when I look in the mirror. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. Jason." I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I simply folded the letter and placed it next to the one he'd written in second grade. 2 different versions of the same person. One full of promise, the other full of regret. And both of them, for better or worse, part of the story that shaped me. I sat by the window that morning with the second letter from Jason resting in my lap, unread for the 10th time. Not because I hadn't looked at the words, but because I hadn't truly let them in. The first time I scanned it, I felt nothing. The second time, a flicker of anger. By the 5th, a soft ache I didn't know where to place. By the 10th, I finally understood what it was. Sorrow. Not for the past. Not even for what Jason had done. But for the future we never got to have. When you raise a child, you don't just feed and clothe and teach them. You build a vision, a fragile, invisible architecture of the life you hope they'll live. You plan imaginary birthdays. You'll never attend holidays. You'll host together. Grandchildren. You might rock to sleep in a chair you've kept for decades. But when that child breaks, your trust shatters the very bones of your belief that future collapses in on itself like a house made of paper in a thunderstorm. Jason's second letter was shorter than the first. No poetry, no apologies. Just a quiet log of effort. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. Those words mattered more than he understood. Because asking, that's what Jason had always done. Demanding, assuming, guilt-tripping. Always asking. But this time he was just reporting. That told me something had changed. Maybe not everything. Maybe not enough. But something. I decided to write him back. Nothing dramatic. Just a note. Jason, thank you for the update. I'm glad to hear you're working on yourself. Keep going. There's no shortcut to rebuilding. But I do hope one day you'll be proud of the man you become. Mom. That was it. I didn't tell him I forgave him, because I hadn't. Not yet. But I also didn't close the door. I left it open just a crack, not wide enough for excuses, but wide enough for change. At the community kitchen, I threw myself deeper into the work. Carla's temporary absence gave me a new rhythm. The volunteers relied on me. I organized schedules, coordinated donations, streamlined prep processes. People started calling me Miss Margaret, and younger volunteers, some barely out of high school, came to me for advice not just in the kitchen, but in life. One of them, a girl named Lily, reminded me of Jason when he was 17. Curious, sarcastic, overconfident, but underneath it all, vulnerable. She came in one morning with puffy eyes and a silence that stretched too long. I pulled her aside during a break. "Want to chop carrots with me?" She nodded. We didn't talk for the first 10 minutes. Just peeled, sliced, dumped into bowls. Then quietly, she whispered, "My mom kicked me out." I didn't ask why. Didn't pry. Instead, I said, "Sometimes the people we love don't know how to show up for us the way we need. That doesn't mean you don't deserve love. It means you need to stop waiting for it from the wrong place." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe I couldn't save Jason, but maybe I could still use my pain to help someone else feel seen. Maybe I could mother the world one scarred heart at a time. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into Elena at the bookstore. She was picking up a novel for her book club and waved me over with her usual conspiratorial grin. "I just saw Jason," she said without ceremony, like announcing the weather. I paused. "Where downtown?" "Working at a small cafe." Looked tired, but grounded. Grounded. That word stayed with me. "He saw me too," she added. "We talked briefly. He mentioned your letter." "Oh," she nodded. "He didn't say much, just that he didn't expect it, and that it meant more than he could explain." I didn't reply. Not because I was holding back, but because I didn't know what to say. I'd never written that letter for a response. I wrote it to close a wound. Days later, a new face came to volunteer at the kitchen. A man in his 60s, broad-shouldered, quiet eyes. He introduced himself as Clark. He didn't talk much, but he worked hard, folding chairs, organizing storage, fixing the back door that had been sticking for months. After a few days, we started sharing stories over dish duty. He had been a construction foreman most of his life. Lost his wife to cancer. 2 grown children, one estranged. "I haven't heard from my daughter in years," he said one afternoon. "She says I was too hard on her growing up." He paused, looking down at the soap bubbles. "Maybe she's right." I didn't try to console him. I just said, "Love is a lot of things. But timing? Timing might be the cruelest part of it." He nodded slowly. "Ain't that the truth?" We never spoke about it again. But after that day, we always worked side by side. No need for explanations, just quiet understanding. By early winter, I'd started to think less about Jason on a daily basis. Not because I no longer cared, but because caring no longer consumed me. That's when the third letter arrived. It was longer, more thoughtful. Mom, I'm still working. I've started therapy. At first, I didn't think I needed it. Thought I could just grind my way back to being okay. But turns out there's a lot I've been running from. I'm learning to sit with things I used to numb. Shame, failure, disappointment. I don't expect you to ever forget what I did. Or even to forgive me. But if someday when you're ready you want to sit down for coffee, I'd like that. No pressure, no conditions. Just two people learning how to see each other again. Jason. I read it twice, and then a third time. This time, something inside me trembled, because that letter didn't sound like the son who had asked for money, lied to my face, and vanished. It sounded like the boy who used to write "I love you" in block letters on handmade cards. The boy who had gotten lost? Maybe he was trying to find his way back. I haven't responded yet. I don't know when I will, but I've kept the letter. It sits on my nightstand now beside the one from second grade, and every few nights I read it again. Not to rehash the past, but to remind myself that people can change. That hurt doesn't always have to harden. That love, if we let it, can bend without breaking. I didn't respond to Jason's third letter right away. In fact, I tucked it into the same small wooden box where I now kept the other two, each folded, carefully smoothed at the edges from how many times I had handled them. That box had unintentionally become a record of our evolving distance, and maybe cautiously of our beginning to bridge it. Each letter was like a rung on a ladder neither of us had dared climb yet. But even as I stayed quiet, I began to notice the subtle, almost invisible way my heart had started softening. Not forgiving, not forgetting, just softening. And perhaps that was the most terrifying part, realizing that after all the betrayal, anger, and pain, there was still a thread inside me, however frayed, that hoped for redemption. It was early December when I received a call from Carla. She was back in town and wanted to meet up for coffee. I hadn't seen her since she'd left to care for her mother out of state. We arranged to meet at a small cafe tucked away on a quiet side street near the library. When I stepped inside, the scent of cinnamon and fresh pastries wrapped around me like a blanket. Carla was already there, sitting at a corner table waving with a warm grin. But just before I reached her, I froze. Behind the counter, arranging baked goods in the display case, was Jason. He hadn't seen me. He was wearing a black apron, his hair tied back, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His movements were calm, methodical. He looked thinner still, but stronger somehow. Centered. I turned quickly, hoping he wouldn't notice. But it was too late. Mom. His voice was hesitant. Not surprised, not panicked. Just soft. I turned back slowly. Our eyes met across the cafe, across the chasm of everything we'd both done and endured. Carla glanced between us, eyes wide with realization. Should I? She started. No, I said. It's fine. Jason stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a cloth. He didn't smile, didn't force anything. He simply walked over, stopping a few feet away. Hi, he said. Hi. A long silence stretched between us. I didn't know you'd be here, he added. Neither did I said truthfully. He nodded. I work here now. He continued, glancing toward the back. The owner's kind. Took a chance on me. I studied him. He wasn't the boy who had disappeared with my savings. He wasn't the man who'd written those smug texts and vanished when the business failed. He wasn't even the version who'd shown up at my door begging for more. This Jason stood still. No performance, no pitch, just presence. Good, I said finally. He exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for weeks. I got your letter, he said. I know. Thank you. For not closing the door. I didn't open it either. I replied, my voice steady. I know, he said again, quieter. Another pause. I'm not trying to rush anything. I just wanted to say I meant what I wrote. I nodded. I know you did. And then, something strange happened. Carla broke the tension with a casual clap of her hands. Well, she said, this is either the most awkward or most meaningful cup of coffee I've had in a while. Or both. Jason and I both chuckled, awkward but real. I took a seat across from her, and Jason, sensing the boundaries, returned behind the counter. He didn't interrupt again. But every now and then, as he served customers or wiped down tables, our eyes would meet briefly. And neither of us looked away. A week later, I returned to the cafe. On purpose this time. Jason looked startled when I walked in, but not unwelcome. I ordered tea, took a seat, and waited. He brought the cup over himself. On the house, he said, setting it down gently. No, I replied. I'm paying for it. He blinked, then nodded. Of course. I sipped slowly, watching him work. The cafe was calm, mostly older patrons reading newspapers or typing on laptops. There was a peace to the space that surprised me. Eventually, when the rush died down, Jason sat across from me for a few minutes during his break. I've been thinking, I said. About the house. He froze slightly. I'm not giving it to you, I clarified. He shook his head quickly. I'm not asking. But when I die, you'll probably inherit it. Unless I change my will. I don't expect anything, Mom. Truly. I know, I said. But I've started thinking about where my things go. Who I trust. Who deserves to carry pieces of my life forward. He looked down, then up. I want to be someone you could trust again one day, he said. I want that too, I admitted. But I'm not there yet. I understand. And I don't owe you trust, I added. You'll have to earn it. Slowly, quietly, with consistency, not words. I will, he said. Or at least I'll try. The weeks that followed were strange in the most delicate way. Jason didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't send more letters. He just showed up, not in my life, but in the world. He worked. He stayed clean. He paid his debts. I saw him occasionally in the cafe or around the neighborhood. Sometimes we waved. Once or twice we spoke. Never for long. But every time I looked at him, I saw less of the boy who broke me, and more of the man trying to rebuild himself from the rubble. Then came the night I found an envelope on my doorstep. Not from Jason. From Lily, the young volunteer from the kitchen. Inside was a simple handwritten card. Miss Margaret. Thank you for being the first adult who made me feel like I wasn't broken. Your words that day saved me in ways you'll never know. I got accepted into culinary school. Starting in the fall. I hope one day I can do for someone else what you did for me. Love, Lily. I sat in the kitchen holding the card to my chest, tears rolling down my cheeks. Not tears of grief, but gratitude. Because in all my pain, all my loss, all my failed hopes, I had still become someone who could offer light to others. And that meant something. Maybe everything. I didn't know what kind of future I had envisioned for myself when I turned 65. A quiet one, I suppose. Predictable. Some gardening. A few out-of-town visits to see friends, or maybe sit by the lake in a rocking chair with a good book. I certainly hadn't imagined lawsuits, bankruptcy letters, or spending every Wednesday in a hairnet slicing onions for a community kitchen. But life doesn't ask for your permission before it rewrites your plans. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Because somewhere in that rewrite, I discovered something I'd lost long ago, the part of me that didn't depend on anyone else to feel alive. A month after receiving Lily's letter, I was invited to speak again at the financial abuse support group, this time as part of a community education panel. I hesitated. Talking about what happened to me was one thing, standing in front of a crowd who expected insight, clarity, even wisdom, that felt different. But I said yes. Not because I felt ready, but because I finally believed that the pain I endured didn't have to end with me. It could become something useful. Something that cut through the silence so many women were still trapped in. The day of the event, I wore my nicest blouse and tucked Jason's second-grade letter into my handbag like a talisman. As I stepped up to the podium, I scanned the room. Dozens of faces, some curious, some guarded, some already brimming with tears. I took a deep breath. "My name is Margaret Holloway," I began, "and I believe that love meant never saying no to your child, until I learned the hard way that it also means knowing when to say enough." I spoke for nearly 20 minutes. I told them everything. The savings I handed over without question. The business that never materialized. The betrayal. The silence. The courtroom. And the slow, grueling process of piecing myself back together. I didn't make myself a hero. I didn't make Jason a villain. I just told the truth. Afterward, a woman in the front row stood up. "I gave my son $60,000 for a business too," she said. Her voice shook. "He used it for drugs. I haven't heard from him in 2 years." She looked at me, eyes full of devastation. "How do you live with it?" I didn't give her a rehearsed answer. I just said, "You start by deciding that your pain deserves more than silence." That night, I returned home to find another letter in my mailbox. This time, it was from Jason, and it wasn't folded in thirds or scribbled on notebook paper. It was formal, typed, an invitation. "Dear Mom, I've recently been promoted to assistant kitchen manager at the cafe. The owner has offered me a small investment opportunity if I choose to stay long term. I know it's not a restaurant. I know it's not what I once promised you, but it's honest work. And it's mine. Next month, we're hosting a small benefit dinner at the cafe. Proceeds will go to the community kitchen you volunteer at. I'd like to invite you. No pressure, no expectations. If you'd rather not come, I understand. But if you do, I'll be there. Not as the boy who took from you, but as a man trying to give something back. Jason." I read the letter twice, then again under the kitchen light. I wasn't sure how I felt. Proud, nervous, suspicious. All of it, probably. But the part that stuck with me was this: "Not as the boy who took from you, but as a man trying to give something back." There was a humility there I hadn't seen in years. And something even rarer in Jason: restraint. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't promising redemption. He was just inviting me to see him. I arrived at the cafe that night just after sunset. The windows glowed warmly. Inside, people bustled about, placing floral centerpieces on each table, setting out menus handwritten in chalk on miniature signs. At the front was a banner: "Benefit dinner for those who feed souls." I stepped inside slowly. Jason spotted me almost immediately. He didn't rush over. He didn't wave theatrically. He walked toward me at a calm, respectful pace, his expression unreadable but open. "Thank you for coming," he said. I nodded. "You did all this." "Not alone," he said, "but I organized most of it. I'm surprised." "I'm not," he said. "Not anymore." He offered me a seat at the back by the kitchen window, where I could see everything but still have space. Throughout the evening, I watched him work. Not perform. Work. He greeted guests, checked on staff, carried trays, wiped down a spill when a waiter tripped. He wasn't pretending to be in charge. He was in charge, but with humility. Near the end of the night, he brought me a slice of honey cake. "You used to make this," he said. "With cinnamon." "I remember," I said softly. He sat across from me, wiping his palms nervously on his apron. "I know I can't undo the past," he said. I didn't respond. "I know you may never trust me fully, or forgive me." Still, I said nothing. "I'm not here to win you back, Mom. I'm here to show up. As often as it takes." That moved me more than any apology ever could. Because showing up, that was always where Jason had failed. And now he was finally learning what love without taking looked like. I reached into my handbag and handed him something across the table. His second-grade letter. His eyes widened. "You kept this?" "Yes," I said. "Even when I wanted to forget everything." He held it like it was made of glass. "I'm not that kid anymore," he whispered. "I know," I replied. "But maybe now you're someone I'd like to know again." They say some bonds are unbreakable, that no matter what happens, love finds its way back. But I don't know if that's true. Because sometimes bonds do break, and maybe they need to. Maybe what love becomes after the breaking is something else entirely, something more honest, more earned. Jason and I were not mother and son the way we used to be. But for the first time in years, we were two people in the same room trying, no longer held together by guilt, no longer tearing each other apart through blame, just trying. And maybe that was more sacred than anything we'd had before. After the benefit dinner, I didn't rush back into his life. I didn't call the next morning. I didn't start showing up at the cafe weekly to check on him. I went back to the kitchen, back to Carla, back to Lily, back to chopping onions and peeling potatoes and serving trays of hot food to people who thanked me with their eyes more than their words. Back to myself. But something had shifted. I no longer carried Jason's betrayal like a wound. It had turned into a scar, tender still, but no longer bleeding. And every so often, when I opened the box of letters on my nightstand, I added a new thought beside them in my journal. We don't heal by erasing. We heal by adding new pages to the story. One Sunday morning, I received a knock on my door. It wasn't Jason. It was Tasha. I stared at her for a long second, stunned. She looked older than I remembered, not aged by time, but by consequence. The gloss of Instagram perfect skin had been replaced by something rawer. Her eyes were darker, heavier. "Hi, Margaret," she said cautiously. "I know this is unexpected. You can say that again." She shifted her weight, unsure whether to stand tall or humble. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to return something." She handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single check, $7,600. "I know it's not much," she said, "but it's what I could scrape together from my share of the cafe's early revenue. I wasn't going to give it back." I thought, I didn't owe you anything, but I did. I stared at the check. "You took money you knew wasn't his," I said evenly. "I know. And you let me believe you were just the girlfriend, not the partner." I was both. And I was greedy. I folded the check. "Why now?" She swallowed. "Because I see what Jason's trying to become, and I wanted to stop being the reason he couldn't." Her words struck something. Not forgiveness, but recognition. It takes a different kind of strength to own your place in someone's downfall. "You could have mailed this," I said. "I thought you deserved to see my face." I nodded. She turned to leave. Just before she reached the bottom step, I said, "I hope you figure yourself out, Tasha. Not for Jason. For you." She nodded, almost smiled, and then she was gone. I didn't tell Jason about the check. Not right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want to center his redemption arc around me. This was mine, my boundary, my silence, my small reclaiming of a debt not financial but spiritual. I deposited the check the next day. Then I used the money to pay for Lily's first semester books at culinary school. When she cried, I told her someone gave this back to me. Now I'm giving it to you. Just promise you'll give something to someone else someday. That to me was closure. Not in courtrooms, not in confrontations, but in the quiet passing of grace from one hand to another. That December, Jason invited me to Christmas dinner at his place, a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore. I didn't say yes immediately. I waited a week before replying, "I'll come, but just dinner. No expectations." He responded with a thumbs up and a smile emoji. A year ago, I would have rolled my eyes at that. Now I found it oddly comforting. When I arrived, the place smelled like sage and roasted squash. He had decorated clumsily. A string of lights drooped along one wall. A miniature tree sat in the corner topped with a crooked paper star. He made everything himself. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, cranberry salad. No over-the-top gestures, no speeches, just dinner. And at the end he handed me a small box. "I didn't get you a gift," he said. "I made one." Inside was a hand-bound journal. On the cover in gold ink was written, "Recipes for Repair." Each page had a recipe, some from my old kitchen binder, some new. All handwritten, some messy, all thoughtful. On the last page he'd written, "Every dish is a second chance. Thank you for giving me one." I didn't cry, I didn't hug him. I just placed the journal in my lap and said, "You're getting better at making things that last." He smiled, and for the first time in a long, long time I saw him. Not as the boy who betrayed me, not as the man trying to atone, but as someone finally building a life that didn't depend on me but still honored where he came from. That night, when I returned home, I opened my own journal and wrote, "Trust doesn't come back all at once. It returns like birds in spring, slowly, cautiously, one at a time. And sometimes they stay." I used to believe healing had a finish line, that someday I would wake up, stretch, make tea, and feel completely unburdened. No ache in my chest when I thought of Jason. No flicker of shame when I remembered how much I'd given no hesitation in saying the word son aloud. But I've learned since that healing is not a line. It's not even a circle. It's a path. One that loops, stumbles, disappears, reappears. And some days like this one, it's just a quiet walk forward with no map, just memory. Spring arrived earlier than usual. The breeze was warm enough that I left the windows open for the first time in months. The scent of fresh grass and laundry detergent drifted through the house like a whispered permission to breathe again. I spent the morning cleaning. Not out of necessity, out of ritual. There's something sacred in wiping down the surfaces of a life you've fought to reclaim. Polishing picture frames, folding blankets, watering houseplants that had wilted and somehow survived. When I reached the bookshelf in the hallway, I pulled down a thick, dust-covered photo album labeled simply Us. Jason was on nearly every page. Baby pictures, toddler tantrums, first day of school, birthday parties, vacations where I was exhausted but smiling because he was happy. I hadn't looked at this album since the lawsuit. Back then, every photo felt like a betrayal, a lie, a record of the love I'd poured into someone who didn't know how to hold it. But now, I flipped through the pages slowly. And what surprised me was that I didn't feel anger. I felt grief, yes, but also a soft kind of pride, because those moments had been real. They weren't erased by what came later. They didn't vanish just because they were followed by pain. Jason had been a boy once full of laughter and questions and bad knock-knock jokes, and I had loved him deeply. That mattered. Still does. That afternoon, I walked to the local park. It was the first time I'd gone there in years without some purpose, not to meet anyone, not to exercise, not to escape the walls of my home. Just to sit. I found a bench under a blooming dogwood tree and watched the world move around me. Children chasing each other through grass, a young couple sharing earbuds on a picnic blanket, an elderly man tossing breadcrumbs to birds. And then, from behind a voice, "Mind if I sit?" I turned. Jason. He held 2 paper cups of tea. One he handed to me. "Chamomile," he said. "Didn't know if you still liked it." "I do," I said, accepting the cup. He sat beside me, not too close, not too far. We sipped in silence for a while. Then he said, "I remember sitting here with you once. I was maybe 8. You told me this tree would bloom even if no one watched." I chuckled. "That sounds like something I'd say." "It stuck," he said. "I think I always believed that was your way of saying I didn't have to prove myself for you to love me. He looked down, thoughtful. I wonder if that's why I stopped trying so hard, because I thought I didn't have to. You didn't, I said. Not to earn love, but to earn trust, he added. That's different. He nodded. You've been earning it, I said finally. Slowly, in small, steady ways. He looked up. Have I? Yes, I said. But I'm not handing it all back. Not because I don't love you, but because it's not mine to give anymore. He looked confused. Trust isn't a gift, I said. It's a structure you build. You're building it now. Piece by piece. Jason was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm okay with that. Later, he walked me home. Not like a son bringing his mother back from errands, but like a friend who didn't want a conversation to end too soon. At my front gate, he paused. I've been thinking about starting something small, he said. Not a restaurant. Not another big dream. Just a small catering company. For nonprofits, community events, people who usually can't afford it. I raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. I want it to be honest, he said. Nothing flashy. Just real food. Real service. I studied his face. He wasn't pitching. He was dreaming, but with both feet planted on the ground. I'm not asking for money, he added quickly. Not even advice. I just wanted to tell you. I smiled. I appreciate that. He turned to go, then hesitated. Would you come by sometime? If I ever get it off the ground, I looked at him. Not the boy. Not the memory. But the man. I might, I said. If the food's good. He grinned. It will be. That night, I sat on my porch long after the sun went down. I thought about all the ways I had carried Jason's failures like they were mine. As if his choices were a reflection of my parenting, my worth, my womanhood. But the truth is, you can love someone deeply and still be devastated by them. You can pour yourself into someone and still have them walk away with the cup half full. That doesn't make you a failure. It just makes you a mother. I opened the small wooden box again. This time, I added a fourth letter. My own. Jason. For a long time, I thought the story of us ended with what you did. But maybe it just changed shape. Maybe the ending I thought I had wasn't the ending at all, just a harsh chapter. I don't know what comes next. I still have days where I feel that old wound tug at me like a loose stitch. But I also have days where I see you now, not the boy I raised, but the man you're becoming, and I feel something I didn't think I could anymore. Hope. Not blind, not desperate, just quiet hope. Keep building. Keep showing up. And if the time ever comes when you need me, not for money, not for rescue, but for presence, I'll try to be there. Mom. I didn't give him the letter. I didn't need to. Because some things don't have to be said aloud to be understood. It was late spring when the past came knocking again. Not Jason this time, not a letter or a phone call. It was an article. A short feature tucked into the local paper's community section. I was sipping tea on the porch when Carla called and said, "You might want to read today's issue." Curious, I walked down to the corner store and picked up a copy. There, on page 6, beneath the headline, "Second Chances Served Hot Local Chef's Redemption Story," was a photo of Jason. He stood in front of a modest food truck, arms crossed, apron dusted with flour, smiling with something I hadn't seen in years. Not charm, not confidence, but contentment. The article told the story how after a long personal downfall, Jason Holloway had begun a catering business from scratch, offering affordable, healthy meals to local shelters, schools, and nonprofits. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't profitable yet. But it was honest. He was doing it on his own. No silent partners. No borrowed dreams. No shortcuts. At the end of the article, he was quoted saying, "I lost a lot by trying to prove myself. Now I'm just trying to feed people. Maybe that's enough." I sat in the park later that day rereading the article under the shade of a tree, tears in my eyes. Not because I was proud, though I was. Not because I'd been right, though, in some ways I had, but because Jason had finally stopped chasing redemption like it was a prize and started living it instead. And it didn't come through money or success. It came through work, through service, through consistency. I didn't reach out right away. I let a week pass, and then I visited the truck. It was parked behind a community center next to a field where children were kicking a half-flat soccer ball. The menu was handwritten in dry erase marker lentil stew, roasted vegetable sandwiches, apple crisp. I stood at the back of the short line, watched as Jason greeted each customer with the same grounded energy. No one there knew who I was. And that was the first time I realized something else: he wasn't performing for me anymore. He didn't know I'd read the article, didn't know I'd show up. He was just doing the work. When I finally reached the window, he looked up, startled but not shaken. "Mom," he said. "Hi." I smiled. "One sandwich. And the apple crisp." He nodded. "Coming right up." He didn't ask why I was there. Didn't rush to fill the silence with apologies or explanations. He just made my food, wrapped it carefully, and handed it over. I paid full price. Then I stepped aside, sat on a bench nearby, and ate in the warm sun while he continued to serve others. And something strange happened. I felt peace. Not the manufactured kind that comes from forced forgiveness or toxic optimism. Real peace. The kind that whispers, "This chapter is closing." And it's closing gently. That evening, I returned home and took out the photo album again. I flipped past the birthdays, the vacations, the awkward school portraits, and I added a new photo printed from the article. Jason in front of the food truck. I labeled it, not with a date, but with a phrase where the rebuilding began. Days later, I received another letter. The last one I would ever need. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. "Mom, I don't know how much of this life I'll get right. But I know one thing now. Trust isn't earned in words. It's earned in what we build day after day. Thank you for teaching me that, even when I didn't deserve your lesson. I hope I make you proud. Not because I need your approval, but because I'm finally becoming someone I'd be proud to know too. Jason." I folded the letter slowly and added it to the box. It rested on top of the others. And then, without hesitation, I closed the lid. Not in anger, not in pain, but in completion. That weekend, the community kitchen hosted a fundraiser, a potluck in the park open to all. Jason donated the food. He cooked for 5 hours straight in the sun, serving over 200 people. No one knew who he had been. They only knew who he was now. Lily stood beside him, helping plate the meals. She'd just finished her first semester in culinary school and had returned for the summer to volunteer. "I think your son might be a better cook than you," she teased as we walked past. "Maybe," I said with a smile. "But I taught him how to boil water." She laughed. Across the field, Jason caught my eye. He raised a plastic cup in a quiet toast. I raised mine back. No fanfare, no declarations. Just two people in the same space building something new. That night, I stood on my porch listening to the crickets, sipping tea. The house was quiet. The world was still. And for the first time since handing over my life savings, I didn't feel bitterness in my bones. I didn't feel fear when I thought of Jason's name. I didn't flinch at the idea of what I'd lost, because what I'd gained, hard-won, painfully earned, was this: myself, and the version of my son who no longer needed to be saved, but had finally learned how to save himself. The last letter I ever wrote to Jason wasn't meant to be sent. I wrote it late at night by lamplight after the fundraiser, with a warm cup of tea beside me and an ache in my chest that felt strangely like joy. It wasn't long. It didn't try to wrap everything up in a bow. It simply said, "Jason, you're not who I dreamed you'd be when you were little. You're not the boy who opened restaurants and named them after his mother. You're not the golden child I once hoped would make my sacrifices look wise. But you are something better now. You are a man who learns, a man who endures, a man who feeds others not for applause, but because it's what your hands have finally learned to do with care. And that, I think, is enough. For me. For us. Mom, I folded the letter and slipped it into the wooden box now full of every painful redemptive moment we had walked through. Then slowly, I walked to the fireplace and placed the box inside. Not to burn it. Just to store it there where I could look at it sometimes, but not trip over it anymore. Because some stories don't need to be carried every day. Some just need a resting place. The kitchen continued to be my home away from home. We expanded operations. Carla and I trained new volunteers. Lily came back after graduating and helped design a new menu that incorporated more sustainable, affordable meals. Jason's catering company Low Flame began working with local shelters and schools. He never bragged, never asked for attention, never brought up the past again. But one Thursday morning he dropped by the kitchen to deliver a batch of roasted root vegetables and a vat of lentil stew. I greeted him at the back door. "How's the truck?" I asked. "Still temperamental," he said. "Like me." I smiled. "You're learning to fix both, though." He chuckled. Slowly. After he finished unloading, he turned and said, "I've been asked to speak at a community forum next month. About rebuilding trust. Second chances." I raised an eyebrow. "You, me?" he said. "Can you believe it?" "Yes," I said. "I can now." He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Awe. Not the kind children have for parents who can do no wrong, but the kind adults have for people they finally understand. "I wouldn't be here," he said, "if you hadn't drawn the line when you did." Drawing the line, I replied, was the only way I remembered where I ended and you began. He nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a check. $3,000. Back payment, he said. "A little at a time. I'm going to repay all of it." I looked at the check, then at him. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "But I want to." That's when I understood redemption doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the quiet follow-through. One morning, weeks later, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror brushing my hair, and I didn't see a woman who had been betrayed. I saw a survivor, a provider, a mentor, a mother not of one son but of many people in need of care, guidance, and truth. I walked through my home past the photos on the hallway walls. Most hadn't changed. Jason's picture at 5, smiling in his Halloween costume, his graduation photo. One or two from recent years, distant, polite. But at the center of the wall, I placed a new one, a shot of him at the fundraiser. Apron-stained sleeves rolled, handing a plate to an elderly woman who was smiling at him like he'd handed her the world. Because in a way he had. Months passed. Seasons changed. The ache of betrayal dulled into memory. And one evening, as I sat by the fire with a book in my lap and rain tapping gently at the windows, I thought about the future, not the one I used to imagine, but the one that was growing quietly around me now. It was smaller than I had dreamed, but it was mine, and it was real. If you're still listening to this story, still holding the thread between my words, I want to say this, not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever given too much, trusted too hard, or loved someone who didn't know how to love back. You can survive the worst kind of heartbreak, the kind that comes not from enemies, but from those you gave life to. And not only can you survive it, you can grow something beautiful from it, a stronger self, a clearer voice, a softer heart, not because it was untouched, but because it was rebuilt. So yes, I gave all my money to my son to start a business, and it cost me more than I ever imagined. But in the end, the real gift wasn't what I gave him. It was what I gave myself: boundaries, dignity, a second chance, not for him, for me. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt forgotten, betrayed, or quietly powerful in your pain, share your story below.